there's a tribe in the Brazilian and Peruvian Amazon called the Matsis, and baked into their very language is a kind of attribution system where every time they relay a piece of information, they attach to it a suffix that points to the person from whom they learned it, which is both really unusual and kind of really organic, because when you think about it, everything we know, everything we believe, every idea that we have can be traced back to some piece of information that we encountered and then retained and then consolidated with other bits of information and combined it into what we call our own ideas. Now, in the jungle of the internet, however, there's a whole different story, not at all like what the Matsis do. So despite the enormous amount of information that we encounter daily and the overwhelming and ever-increasing urgency and really difficulty of finding the meaningful and the important and separating it from the growing spectrum of the meaningless, we don't have such a system of attribution. And yet, this act of information discovery is a form of creative and intellectual labor, and, if you will, a form of authorship. And honoring it is really about honoring the basic fabric of the web and everything that makes it the amazing, time-sucky, riveting rabbit hole of discovery that it is. For the past 7 years or so, I've been running a site called Brain Pickings and spending a lot of time, both online and off, dealing with this world of knowledge and information and thinking about the architecture of knowledge and the information economy and where ideas come from, and getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of attribution that we see. And so last year, actually, here at SparkCamp, I did one of those session talks on the subject, and there was a lot of conversation about what we can do in the media to kind of foster this culture of attribution. And by the way, we're talking about attribution of discovery, not of origin. So the analogy is not attributing the painting to the painter who made it, but really recognizing the journalist who wrote about the painting without whom you would have never heard of the artist. So that's the level we're talking about. Anyway, I gave one of these talks, and the question emerged of, can we somehow bake it into the language of the web and into the language of journalism and build a system that is essentially a code of ethics for attribution, a framework for doing it right? So this March, I launched something at South by called the Curator's Code, which attempts to address this in a kind of twofold way. On the one hand, there's the conceptual, almost manifesto-like framework that talks about what attribution discovery is, why it matters, and roughly how it works. And on the other hand, a more practical tool that we can use as journalists and editors, and as much as I loathe the word curators of information, to implement this spirit. So together with my designer, Kelly Anderson, we developed 2 Unicode characters that capture sort of the 2 different levels or tiers, if you will, of attribution. And one of them is kind of the traditional via that you would now see as via. It looks like a sideways infinity symbol split in half, sort of speaking to this idea that everything's connected. And it means a direct attribution, meaning I found something else on the web and I'm reposting it and sharing it in my own audience without modifying it much or at all, and here's my source. And the other one is the sideways arrow, meaning indirect attribution, meaning I found something somewhere, it gave me an idea, I did my own original research or added to it and enhanced it and shared it with my audience with a unique point of view, but here's the source without which none of this would have happened. And then we built a little bookmarklet that you can see in the right up there that lets you insert those characters in any text field that you're composing, either in HTML, which links back to the Curator's Code site to kind of help spread the message of the project, or just copy the plain straight up symbol and paste it into something like a tweet, where it also has the double benefit of sparing you 2 precious characters of 140. But of course, the big caveat to all of this is that I never really cared if people used the characters themselves or the old-fashioned via or hat tip or just a raw hyperlink, which is really sort of the most primary way of attributing. The point was not to tell people how to attribute, but to really talk about and educate about why we should attribute. And more than anything, to flip around this notion that we have that revealing our sources or our inspirations somehow detracts from our own originality and our own creativity, and instead flip it around and celebrate the opposite, which is this idea that everything's connected, everything borrows from everything else, and that's the beauty of the web. And by the way, I know of the Matsis from my friend Jerry, who introduced me to the Stanford researchers studying their languages, so hat tip, Jerry.